What happens when a billionaire buys one night with a woman, only to discover she's the one person who sees through his armor? Grace Miller, a struggling baker fighting to save her brother's life, never expected to be auctioned or chosen. Ethan Hale, a cold CEO with everything except freedom, never expected to care. But one contract changes everything. Love, lies, redemption, and a secret that nearly ruins it all. Will they survive the truth or walk away forever? Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories like this one. The October wind swept down Fifth Avenue like a whisper with sharp teeth, tugging at coats and lifting leaves in chaotic spirals. Inside the glass fortress of Hale Capital, 33 stories above the street, Ethan Hale stood motionless before the vast window of his corner office. The city pulsed below, alive with light and urgency, but Ethan's sharp gray eyes remained cold, detached, like steel before the strike. In one hand he held a glass of bourbon that caught the dim light. In the other, a folded piece of paper. A summons of sorts from his mother. "You will marry, Ethan," she had said earlier that morning in the boardroom, her tone as firm as the marble table between them. "This family doesn't survive on numbers alone. The public needs an heir. You need a future. And no one trusts a man who builds empires without building a home." The board had been silent. Ethan, unmoved, he didn't believe in love. Not after what he saw growing up. Two people tied by contract and pride, their affection eroded by ambition and silence. To Ethan, marriage was a merger, not a miracle. That night, he was expected at a formal engagement dinner, one arranged for him without his consent. The chosen candidate, heiress, Ivy League, well-connected, and about as interesting as beige wallpaper. But instead of showing up in a tux and fake smile, Ethan made a sharp detour. An envelope had appeared on his desk that afternoon. No name, just a gold emblem and an address on the Upper West Side. A charity event, it said. Exclusive. Discreet. He'd usually ignore such theatrics. But tonight, rebellion felt like oxygen. The event took place in a private ballroom hidden behind a historic hotel where chandeliers dripped crystals and laughter floated over violins. Ethan arrived unannounced, blending into the crowd with calculated ease. No one noticed the black cashmere coat, the open collar, the indifference in his stride. Champagne was poured. Bids whispered. The room buzzed with old money and hollow promises. A woman in a blood-red gown took the stage, her voice smooth like brandy. "Ladies and gentlemen," she purred, "thank you for joining us in this unique opportunity. Tonight you won't be bidding on art or antique cars. Tonight you'll bid for time." There was a pause, then murmurs, amusement, curiosity. "One evening," she continued. "Dinner, conversation, no expectations beyond companionship, nothing scandalous, unless you make it so." Laughter erupted. Ethan didn't laugh. One by one, women were presented like curated treasures. Gowns, glitter, polished smiles. Each walked on stage and offered a name, a laugh, a carefully rehearsed gesture. And each time, Ethan remained still, unmoved, as paddles lifted and numbers soared, until her. She stepped into the light in a simple white dress that fell just below her knees. No sequins, no diamonds. Her hair was loosely gathered, as if she hadn't tried to impress or didn't know how. She clasped her hands, her eyes wide and scanning the room like she was searching for a door that didn't exist. The hostess cleared her throat. "This is Grace Miller, age 30, first-timer, a touch shy but we all were once." The room chuckled. Ethan didn't. Grace didn't speak, she barely breathed. And in that silence, in that fragile defiance against a stage meant to sell her, Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Bidding began. 10,000, 25, 50, 100. Grace flinched. Ethan raised his paddle. 1 million. A collective gasp. The hostess stammered. 1 million? "Going once," she said, "going twice. Sold." Every eye turned toward Ethan, but he had already leaned back, taking a slow sip of bourbon like he'd just bought a painting, not a person. He hadn't meant to. Not really. But she didn't fit here, and neither did he. That, somehow, felt like reason enough. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly as Grace Miller wrapped a loaf of cranberry walnut bread in brown paper, tying it with practiced fingers. Morning light filtered through the smudged windows of golden crust, painting honeyed stripes across the worn floorboards. The scent of cinnamon rolls and butter clung to every inch of the small shop, wrapping customers in warmth as they stepped inside. Grace smiled automatically. thanked a regular, and turned back to restock the pastries, her hands moving, her mind 1,000 miles away. Less than 24 hours had passed since the auction, since the man in the sharp suit with unreadable eyes had spoken those two words. 1 million. She hadn't slept, not really. Her thoughts had spun in frantic circles. Liam's hospital bills, the transplant deadline, the cold weight of what she had agreed to. One evening. Dinner only. A sum so far beyond what she'd hoped for, it felt like a cruel trick. She hadn't expected to see him again. But when the bell rang again, she turned and nearly dropped the tray of croissants. Ethan Hale stood in the doorway, framed by sunlight and street noise, dressed not in his designer tuxedo from the night before, but in a black coat over a gray turtleneck. His presence didn't belong in this humble place. He was too sharp, too composed, like a chess piece misplaced on a wooden checkerboard. "Mr. Hale," she said, startled. He stepped forward, his hands in his pockets. "Just Ethan." She wiped her hands on her apron, nerves flaring. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you," he replied simply. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, glancing toward the back room. Liam was asleep, monitored by a nurse who came for a few hours each morning. The bakery was quiet, still early. "Okay," she said finally, leading him to a small table by the window. Rain tapped gently at the glass as they sat. Ethan folded his hands neatly, his voice low. "I did some research about you." "About Liam?" Grace stiffened. "You had me investigated?" she asked. "Call it due diligence." Her expression darkened, but he continued before she could protest. "I know what his surgery costs. I know your bakery isn't enough. And I know that last night wasn't about glamour for you. It was desperation." Her stomach clenched. "And you came here to remind me of that?" "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "I came to make you an offer." She said nothing, but the air between them tightened. "My mother gave me an ultimatum," Ethan said. "Marry before the end of the fiscal year, or lose my stake in Hale Capital. She believes image is everything, that a man with no family has no stability, no soul." Grace frowned. "And what does that have to do with me?" "I need a wife," he said flatly. "On paper, for 1 year. No intimacy, no expectations, appearances only. You'd live in my residence, attend events, you'd receive a monthly allowance, and Liam's medical expenses, every last one, would be covered, up front." Grace stared at him. "You want me to fake a marriage?" He nodded once. Her thoughts spiraled. Liam's fragile smile that morning, the surgery estimate with the red circle, the stack of bills that grew heavier each week. "Why me?" she whispered. "You don't want anything from me," Ethan said. "You didn't push, didn't ask for more. You looked terrified on that stage, and you still stood there. I need someone I can trust to keep this simple. No drama, no strings." Grace looked down at her hands, flour still dusting her skin. She had prayed for a miracle, and now one was staring her in the face, dressed in gray wool and cold logic. "You have 24 hours, Ethan said, rising. He placed a sleek black card on the table. "Call me if you decide to say yes." Then he turned and left, the door chiming again behind him. Grace stared at the card in silence, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. It was absurd, insane. But then again, so was watching your brother fade and knowing money could save him if you were willing to pay with your pride. Rain streaked the windows of Grace's apartment as she sat on the edge of her worn couch, Ethan Hale's business card turning over and over between her fingers. Her mind had been a battlefield since he left the bakery, practicality clashing with pride, hope warred with fear. She hadn't told Liam about the proposal. How could she? How do you explain to your little brother that you're considering marrying a stranger just to save his life? In the bedroom down the hall, Liam slept soundly, the soft beeping of his heart monitor faint but steady. Earlier, he had laughed over a silly meme and asked if he could go back to school soon. Grace had smiled, told him soon, then locked herself in the kitchen and cried. The doctors had been blunt. He needed the transplant within 8 weeks. The donor had been found. The surgery could work. But the price tag remained unforgiving. $300,000, not including post-op care. Grace stood and walked to the small cabinet where she kept their bills. Opening the folder felt like peeling back her own skin. Utility notices, credit statements, medical estimates, each a loud reminder that no amount of overtime baking scones would be enough. Her chest tightened. She picked up her phone, stared at it, put it down, picked it up again. Then, with a deep breath, she dialed. The The line rang once, twice. "Ethan Hale," came the voice on the other end, calm, cool, precise. "It's Grace," she said, gripping the phone tightly. "I'll do it, just for Liam." There was a beat of silence. "Understood," he said. By noon, a man in a pinstriped suit arrived at her apartment with a contract printed on heavy cream-colored paper. He walked her through every clause at the cramped kitchen table while she poured tea with trembling hands. The terms were clear. 1 year of legal marriage, effective upon signing. No physical relationship was expected. Grace would relocate to Ethan's penthouse in Tribeca. She would receive a monthly stipend of $15,000. All of Liam's medical expenses, including the surgery and rehabilitation, would be paid in full. The man smiled politely, asked if she had questions. Grace shook her head, then signed. That night she packed with mechanical precision. She folded her life into a single suitcase. Clothes, toiletries, a worn copy of The Secret Garden, the same book she'd read to Liam 100 times. She didn't bring her baking tins. Didn't bring the ivy plant on the windowsill. This wasn't a real move. It was a transaction, no matter how desperately it was cloaked in civility. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside her building. Grace kissed Liam on the forehead, telling him she had accepted a new job downtown and would still see him every day. He smiled, groggy but trusting. The nurse waved from the door. When she stepped into the vehicle, Grace felt something in her shift, something fragile and final. The penthouse took her breath away. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Hudson, sleek furniture that didn't look like it had ever been touched. Ethan was waiting by the window, hands in his pockets, dressed in a navy button-up and slacks. His presence was effortless, like the apartment belonged more to him than his own skin. "Welcome," he said simply. Grace hesitated in the foyer. "Where should I?" "Down the hall," he said. "First door on the left. Your keycard's inside." No small talk. No warmth. Just business. Her room was stunning. Cool neutrals, plush bedding, a closet already stocked with formal wear in her size. A monogrammed robe hung on the wall. She stood motionless for a moment, surrounded by quiet luxury, then sat on the bed and finally exhaled. Days passed with a rhythm that felt both foreign and calculated. Ethan left early, returned late. They barely spoke except to coordinate schedules. She visited Liam every afternoon, chauffeured by a driver Ethan had assigned. The arrangement was clean, cold, and strangely safe. Until one evening, she found herself sketching by the bay window, a forgotten hobby she hadn't touched in years. She didn't notice Ethan walk in. "You draw?" he asked. Startled, she slammed the notebook shut. "Just doodles." He nodded once and walked away. The next morning, a leather-bound sketch pad and a set of pencils sat neatly on her bed. There was no note. The black tie fundraiser at the Metropolitan Hall shimmered with old money and practiced smiles. Grace stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, the hem of her sapphire gown brushing polished marble floors, her heart beating louder than the string quartet in the corner. Across the room, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, his tuxedo fitting like armor. He glanced at her briefly, expression unreadable, but his eyes lingered a second longer than necessary. It had been nearly 2 months since the contract began. They had fallen into a strange rhythm. Quiet breakfasts, scheduled events, short exchanges in the hallway. But something had shifted. Ethan now lingered when she spoke. Grace sometimes caught herself waiting by the door when he came home late, pretending to check her phone. The silences between them had softened, no longer hollow but curious, like they were both listening for something they didn't yet know how to say. This night, though, was different. Grace had stepped out of the black car earlier and felt Ethan's gaze sweep over her. "You look," he had paused, as if the words were foreign on his tongue. "Elegant." She had arched a brow. That almost sounded like a compliment. He'd smirked, offering her his arm. "Don't let it go to your head." Now, as they moved through the crowd, hand in hand, their performance was effortless. People greeted them as a couple. Some nodded with admiration, others with veiled skepticism. But Ethan didn't flinch. He introduced her as his wife, his voice steady, his gaze never drifting. And for the first time, Grace didn't feel like she was pretending. At least not entirely. Then came Camille. She arrived fashionably late in a crimson gown that clung to her like a dare. Her smile was all teeth, her eyes sharp as glass. "Grace," she said smoothly, approaching with a champagne flute in hand. Still glowing, I see. Marriage suits you. Grace smiled politely. It has its moments. Camille's lips curled. Funny how things change. One moment you're a mystery, the next you're a household name. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Tell me, how does it feel to be the woman who sold herself for an evening and ended up married to New York's most eligible bachelor? The blood drained from Grace's face. Ethan, standing beside her, stiffened. You knew? She whispered, turning toward him. He didn't speak. Ethan, she repeated, her voice cracking. You knew about the auction before you met me? He finally looked at her, but the answer was already there. Her breath hitched. You bought me, knowing exactly who I was, why I was there. You knew. I didn't, he began. She stepped back, heart pounding. You didn't what? Think I'd find out? Think I'd care? Was it all just a game to you? The murmurs around them had begun. The shifting glances. Camille stood triumphant, sipping her drink as though she hadn't just shattered the fragile world Grace had started to believe in. I need air, Grace said, turning sharply and disappearing into the corridor without waiting for Ethan to follow. She didn't know how long she stood on the terrace, the city glowing beneath her like a lie she'd almost believed. Her hands trembled on the railing. The cold bit into her bare shoulders, but she barely felt it. Ethan found her minutes later, rain misting his hair, his voice quiet. I didn't mean for you to find out like that. But you did mean for me not to find out at all, she said without turning. He took a step forward. Grace, I never expected it to turn into this. What is this, Ethan? She snapped, spinning to face him. Because I thought maybe it was more than a contract. I let myself believe it, and that makes me more of a fool than I've ever been. He looked devastated, but she couldn't afford to care. I can't do this, she whispered. Not if I don't know what's real. And then she walked away, her heels echoing down the marble corridor, leaving behind the man who had bought her, kissed her, and broken her all the same. The rain had started by the time Grace stepped out of the gala and onto the sidewalk, her heels clicking against the wet pavement as if echoing her heartbeat. She didn't call a car. She didn't think. She just walked, head down, dress clinging to her legs, the chill cutting through her like glass. By the time she reached her apartment, she was soaked, her hair plastered to her skin, mascara long gone. But none of it mattered. She barely felt human. Inside, Liam was asleep, a nurse reading quietly in the corner. The room smelled of antiseptic and lavender hand lotion. Grace peeled off her coat and sat at the foot of Liam's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The beeping of the monitor offered a strange comfort. At least something in her life still made sense. She had left Ethan, and he hadn't stopped her. The following days blurred together. She poured herself into Liam's care, sorting his medication, arguing with insurance reps, holding his hand during blood draws. But every time she sat still, every time silence fell, Ethan returned to her thoughts. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the morning coffees, the sketchbook on her bed, the way his hand had lingered at the small of her back like a secret. It wasn't the contract that haunted her, it was everything that had happened outside of it. And that's what broke her. She missed him, and she hated herself for it. Back in the penthouse, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen island, his untouched coffee growing cold. The apartment was a shell without her. The echo of her laughter, the scent of vanilla from her hair, the watercolor sketches taped to the fridge, they were gone. He had tried to bury what he felt, hide behind deals and distance, but it had all unraveled the moment Grace had looked at him with betrayal in her eyes. He had let the past script his present, and in doing so, he'd lost the one person who had ever seen him for more than his last name. Camille stopped by unannounced the next morning, her usual arrogance dulled by guilt. I didn't mean for her to leave, she muttered, standing in the doorway. I thought I was protecting you. Ethan didn't look up from his chair. You destroyed the only honest thing I've ever had. She said nothing more. Meanwhile, Grace kept checking her phone, typing messages she never sent. I'm scared. I still feel what I felt that night. I don't know what that means, but you need to know. Then deleting them. Her heart wanted to forgive. Her head wasn't ready. And then, the day of Liam's surgery arrived. The hospital buzzed with quiet urgency. Nurses moved quickly. Doctors briefed her gently. Grace kissed Liam's forehead, whispering, I'll be here when you wake up. He gave her a tired smile, brave beyond his years. Then he was wheeled away, and she was alone in the waiting room, hands cold, heart frozen. Across the city, Ethan sat in a boardroom with a dozen suits, a massive acquisition deal on the table. He should have been focused. But all he saw was Grace, alone, scared. Waiting. Without a word, he stood. "Mr. Hale?" one executive called. "Reschedule," Ethan said, already heading for the elevator. Grace didn't look up when the elevator doors opened. She assumed it was a nurse or another anxious parent. "Grace," she turned. Ethan stood there, rein on his shoulders, his expression raw. "I heard today was the day," he said. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice trembling. "Because I should have been here all along." She stared at him, unsure what to say. He stepped forward. "You're right. I knew. I lied by omission, but what we had, what I felt, wasn't a lie. Not 1 second of it. I love you. No contracts, no pretense, just love." Tears welled in her eyes. "She's in surgery," she whispered, "and I'm terrified. Then I'll wait with you." And he did. For hours they sat side by side in the waiting room, saying nothing and everything. When the surgeon finally appeared with a tired smile and said, "The transplant was successful," Grace burst into tears. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. That night, as Liam slept peacefully for the first time in months, Grace and Ethan walked the quiet hospital corridor. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their steps soft on the linoleum. "I don't know what happens next," she said. Ethan stopped. "We make a new contract. No terms, just us." She looked at him, hope blooming in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "yes. Some love stories don't begin with flowers and fairy tales. They begin in chaos, in desperation, in moments when we think we have nothing left to give." A Million for Grace reminds us that even in the most transactional circumstances, humanity has a way of breaking through. Grace didn't choose this arrangement out of romance. She chose it out of survival. Ethan didn't offer the deal for love, he offered it for control. And yet, in the quiet spaces between duty and performance, something real began to grow. The story teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness, it's courage. That trust is not built in grand gestures, but in the small, consistent acts of showing up. And most importantly, that people are allowed to change. Ethan became more than a businessman. Grace became more than a caregiver. Together, they built something honest not by design, but by choice. They proved that love doesn't need perfection. It just needs truth. No contract, no calculation, no carefully crafted plan can ever replace what happens when two people truly see each other and still choose to stay. The past may shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. And sometimes, what starts as a lifeline turns into a lifetime. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more heartfelt tales here on the channel.